Hey guys, this is Josh here with Trillium Wild Edibles, and today I want to bring you a video on how to identify 5 medicinal plants as well as talk about some of their uses. And in this video we're also going to cover what parts of the plants to use and where these plants like to grow. From plants like Yarrow and Boneset all the way to the common Plantain, which can be found in your yard, all of these plants are easy to identify and they make great medicine. So without further ado, let's get right into it. This is an extremely beautiful summertime plant. This plant's kind of hard for people to find. The main reason is because it's very inconspicuous. You usually don't even notice it. One of the best ways to notice yarrow is those very bright white flowers. They stick out very well the time of year that yarrow usually blooms. In my area, yarrow usually flowers, usually starting at the middle of May, and it'll flower all the way until September in my area, and I live in Indiana. So that should kind of give you an idea of when yarrow will flower in your area. There are a lot of different varieties of yarrow. The wild kind, like you see here, is going to have a white flower. Usually people grow this ornamentally at their house, and you'll see all kinds of different colors like pinks and reds and blues and such. You might even see some white within those as well. I don't know if those have the same uses medicinally. However, they are a form of yarrow. But for safety, it's best to go ahead and use the wild version of yarrow like you see here, this beautiful white flowered version. Anywhere you find one yarrow plant, you're most likely going to find some more. If we take a look at the ground around us right now, we're going to notice a whole bunch of yarrow leaves. And you can see some small yarrow plants here getting ready to bud and start flowering. If we look back here, we can see another plant getting ready to start flowering soon. Yarrow has very distinct leaves. The leaves are very finely cut, and you'll notice all these little bitty leaflets running down this stem. Now in your field guides you're going to be kind of warned about the differences between yarrow and Queen Anne's lace and hemlock. And some of your field guides are going to warn you against using yarrow or Queen Anne's lace if you're a beginner forager. And in my opinion, I don't really quite understand that logic. It's good that they're doing it and trying to keep you to be safe, but Poison Hemlock doesn't really look anything like yarrow in my opinion. Yarrow's leaves, as you can see, are very fine, very delicate. They have superbly deep cuts. You can see just how delicate these leaves really are. I call these leaves lacy because to me they remind me of like Victorian lace. They're very fine and almost fringe-like. Yarrow has a really nice growth pattern in the sense that the leaves all grow alternating of each other. You'll notice that the leaves alternate all the way up this plant. The stem of yarrow is rather fuzzy. It's kind of stiff and almost woody, if you will. Here you might be able to see the fuzz on the stem. It kind of resembles like a woolly covering, if you will. Yarrow can grow to varying heights. You will find yarrow plants all the way up to 3 feet tall. You can see like this one here. This one's about 3 feet tall. I usually don't find them getting much larger than this in my area, though you might where you live. You can see this little smaller one here growing up that's getting ready to start flowering. And as this plant grows, it's going to continue to grow a little taller and taller until it reaches its end size, which is only maybe another 1.5 feet maybe for this one. Yarrow has a long history of uses all across the world dating back several thousands of years. The plant is named after its supposed discoverer Achilles. Its Latin name is Achillea millefolium. And like I said, it derives that name from Achilles, its supposed discoverer, who was said to have used yarrow on his troops to heal sword gashes and sword wounds. That's one of the many properties of this plant, or one of the many benefits of this plant, is that you can use it as a pain reliever. You can use it to stitch up wounds, so to speak. The plant is such a good astringent, it'll contract the skin so much that it'll actually help seal up rather deep wounds. The plant not also heals pain, but it's also anti-inflammatory. It's also antibacterial, so while at the same time you're healing your cut, you're cleaning it out, and you're reducing swelling anywhere near the trauma area. So that's a really good benefit to this plant. As far as using yarrow, you can use the entire herb. The entire above ground part of the plant is supposed to be used. A quick note of caution though with yarrow, yarrow does contain 2-hone. The fresh plant contains the most 2-hone. After it's dried, the 2-hone is released. 2-hone is known as the active compound within absinthe. 2-hone exists in very large quantities in plants like wormwood as well. And those kind of plants are known because of their effects. 2-hone can kind of make you feel really drunk. And it can, if you take too much, make you hallucinate. So that's something to keep in mind. So whenever you make your yarrow tea or your yarrow tincture, It's a good idea to use the dried plant. However, using some of the fresh plant won't hurt too much because the tuhone and yarrow will get dissolved by steeping it in hot water. So that's something else to keep in mind. Unfortunately though, yarrow is rather bitter in taste, so if you make a tea out of it, kind of be cautious of that. Yarrow does have its own distinct smell, though in my opinion it's really hard to describe. It's very aromatic when you smell it, kind of smelling almost like some sort of perfume. There's an astringency to it, or like a tannic smell. I don't think this plant actually has tannins, but it reminds me of the smell of whenever I'm leaching acorns. So if you've ever leached acorns, you might know what that smells like. But it smells very, very good whenever you crush the flowers or the leaves or even the stem. You can crush any part of the plant in your fingers, crush it and rub it between your fingers and take a smell. And you're going to smell this really aromatic smell that, like I said, is really hard to describe. And today, I want to bring you an identification video on common mullein, or Verbasum thaspus, as it's known by its scientific name. The plant that we're looking at with this very tall flower spike and these yellow flowers is common mullein. There are a couple different ways that you can tell this, but one of the first and foremost is its very distinct flower buds with these flowers growing on it. It grows in a very long spike, just like you can see on this plant right in front of us. Now if we look very closely at these flower buds on this flower spike, we're going to notice that they look somewhat kind of like hops flowers. They're very bulbous, and they almost look somewhat like Brussels sprout as well. And however, this is just the flower buds, which means that the flowers, like this little yellow one, are going to be coming in and out. Now the mullein flowers really interestingly, and I say that just because its flowers will pop out at different times. You won't always see all of the flower buds on one spike flowering at the same time. As a matter of fact, I never have. You usually will find the flowers growing somewhat like this, where you're going to see a few flowers at a time. And once you get towards the very top of the flower spike, you're going to notice this conical-like point that it comes to. Now one thing you're going to notice if you look up close at the flower buds, you're going to notice that they're also very hairy. They're kind of a light green in color, and they're very, very fuzzy. Now that's an interesting feature to this entire plant, because the entire plant has this fuzz from the stems, whoops, I just lost a flower there, from the stems to the flower buds and the leaves. The only plant part that doesn't have those fuzz is the actual flowers themselves. Mullein's flowers are very distinct in the sense of their yellow color. There are a lot of plants with yellow flowers, so just because you see a plant with a yellow flower like this doesn't mean it's mullein. However, if you see this distinct stalk, this distinct flower stalk, then it most likely will be a mullein. I don't know of any other plant that has this distinct flower stalk. And the flowers being yellow, they will have 5 petals, just like you can see on this flower right here in front of us. Granted, it's starting to close up now, but it does have 5 petals. You can even see the pistils or stamens inside of the flower there. You're going to notice a lot of ants. Main reason for that is that ants really love mullein for some reason. I don't know why, but they absolutely adore it. A couple interesting things to know about mullein is one, that it really loves clearings, and it also loves poor soils. This plant will generally grow well where not many other plants will. It's also a biennial, which means that in its second year it will go to flower, like we can see right here. So what that means is this plant is 2 years old, whereas if you look around, you might find a basal rosette of mullein. Now right here is a really good example of a basal rosette of mullein leaves. They're very large and they're very fuzzy. And they grow in a rosette, which means they grow in a circular pattern around the stem. Now this is a first-year plant, so it's not going to flower this year. But that gives me an idea of when to come back if I'm looking for this exact plant, or if I see this plant and I don't see any flower stalks in the area, then that tells me all the plants in that area are 1 year old. So that's kind of good information to know. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about the flower buds and the flowers themselves of mullein, let's talk a little bit about its leaves and the features of its stem. Now one thing to note about the leaves of common mullein is that they are very large and ovate in shape. They're somewhat oval and they will come to a little bit of a point, so you might describe them as a really big lance point, but they're so large they're usually described in your field guides as ovate in structure. They are simple along the margins, meaning they have no teeth. There's no lobes or any discerning features upon the sides of these leaves, just like you can see on this leaf in my hand. However, these leaves are very fuzzy, they're very soft, they feel somewhat like felt or velvet. So this is a really nice feature to this plant because there's not too many plants that I know of that look just like mullein with this feature. So that makes it an easy plant to identify. Another good use about these leaves, with them being so soft, is that they make excellent toilet paper. Mullein is commonly referred to as cowboy's toilet paper because of how soft these leaves really are. They feel like big pads between your fingers. They're so soft. Another common name for this plant is lamb's ear because the leaves are so soft, they remind people of the ear of a baby lamb. Now here's a really good look of the underside of one of the leaf nodes where it joins the stem, and here you can see those little hairs and those little fuzz running down, and you may also see part of the leaf margin coming down the stem just like this. And on this plant right in front of us, this runs all the way down the stem. See, there's the margin of a leaf, and we follow that margin down, and then it connects to the stem. Now once we get down towards the bottom of a second-year plant, we're going to notice how large these leaves can actually get. If you look at this leaf in my hand, it's probably about 2 to 3 times larger than my hand is. So this is an extremely large leaf, and this is very indicative of common mullein. The leaves of common mullein usually grow in an alternating pattern up the stem. However, they can appear opposite, and this is a really good example. But if we look closely at where these two join the main stem, we can actually see the one on the left joins the stem at a node much higher than the one on the right. And then if we continue to go down the plant, we're going to notice these alternating leaves from one side to the other, all the way down the entire plant. Mullein is a very tall growing plant. It can grow anywhere from 6 to 7 feet tall. And this plant in front of me is close to about 4.5, 5 feet tall right now. It's probably not going to grow much larger just because of where it's at. However, on the sides of the roads, you might find them quite a bit bigger, like I said, up to about 7 feet. Now you may also be wondering what it is you can do with mullein. Mullein is a very popular medicinal plant. It's actually native to Europe, and it's considered an invasive plant here in the United States, but it is a very useful medicinal plant. This plant's very mild in its flavor. It's a very good expectorant, which means it helps to expel mucus from the lungs and the mucous membranes like in your nose and things like that. This is really good for clearing up chest congestion. This is also really good for any respiratory ailment because it does have some immune boosting properties to it as well. So whenever you want to use common mullein, what parts exactly would you use? You can use the entire plant. The entire plant is usable from its flowers to its flower buds to its stems and its leaves. Its root is even usable as well. You can use this plant to make teas or tinctures. You can use it to make salves if you really wanted to. It doesn't have much of a use for salves. Its main use is for teas and tinctures. And to make the tea, you can either use the fresh plant or the dried plant. And the same with the tinctures. You can use the dried or fresh plant for tinctures. So that's really nice because it has a lot of multiple uses and you can use it different ways. There's not a specific way to use it as in it has to be dried or it has to be fresh. However, it is better to prepare the tea from dried mullein and to make the tincture from fresh mullein for some people. But it may not be that way for everybody. So it is worth it to experiment just a little bit. And today I want to bring you an identification video on jewelweed or spotted touch-me-not. The plant that we're looking at is jewelweed or spotted touch-me-not, and it gets its name from the spots inside of the flower, inside of the throat of the flower, and from its seed pod, which is starting to develop right here. Whenever the seed pod is fully developed, whenever you touch them, it will burst open with seed pods, hence the name touch-me-not. Jewelweed is an extremely common and very popular medicinal herb for treating poison ivy rash and bug bites and insect stings. A lot of people really like this plant for that reason, and it does work rather well according to a lot of people. So how exactly do you identify jewelweed? Well, this is a really easy plant to identify, so let's take a look at some of its features. The leaves of jewelweed are going to grow in an oval shape or somewhat of a lance shape whenever you look at the silhouette of the leaves. And whenever you look at the margins of the leaves, like we can see following my thumb right here, you can see these very slight teeth that run down the margin of the leaf. As we look down from the top of the stem on Jewelweed, we're going to notice that its leaves will grow in an alternating pattern. You can see how these leaves alternate up the stem, and they will do this all the way up the stem of the plant. So Jewelweed has an alternating pattern with its leaves growing up the stem. And its leaves are in this oval shape with a very slight toothed margin, just like you can see here. Now something else you're going to notice on Jewelweed is the red tinging that goes up the leaf meristem, or the main leaf stem, that goes to the petiole of the leaf. And you can see this red tinging on this stem right here. And as we get up the plant towards the top, that tinging is going to be less noticeable. It's going to be less distinct. Just like you can see on these here, it's a little bit lighter in its color. Then as we go down the plant, you're going to notice that tinging becomes even more distinct, and it will run the whole length of the leaf stem all the way to the main stem of the plant. Whenever we look at the flower of Jewelweed, we're going to notice 3 petals. The bottom 2 are going to be hanging down, just like we can see right here. And then the top 1 is going to be up like this. And then the rest of the flower goes back in this shoe or horn or trumpet-like shape with this little spathe, which is what this little curlicue towards the very back of the flower by my thumb is called. It's called the spathe of the flower. As we look inside the throat of the flower, we're going to notice these little spots that go from orange to this dark red. And this is a very distinct feature of Jewelweed, and even the yellow flowered version will have this. Now, one thing you might want to note on this species, it does have an orange flower. However, it's somewhat yellow and red with these reddish-like spots towards the very back of the horn shape, just like we can see on this one. Now, after this plant flowers and it gets pollinated, it will produce its seed pods. You can see the seed pod is this little bitty round lentil-looking thing by my thumb. Now, what's interesting about these seed pods is that whenever these seed pods are fully formed and they're full of seeds, all you have to do is very lightly touch them and they will burst open, which is why it gets its name touch-me-not or spotted touch-me-not, because of the spots along the flower and inside of the throat, and then this very delicate seed pod that it will form. The stem of Jewelweed is round in shape. There's not too many discerning features about the shape of its stem. However, it does have this somewhat translucent look. Just like if we look on this one here, we can actually see it looks somewhat translucent or semi-translucent. And that's because of the amount of water that this plant has within it. What happens with Jewelweed is that whenever it rains, this plant will actually suck up a lot of water, which makes it extremely juicy. And if we follow the stem down, we can actually see the swelling starting to take place here at this upper node of the leaf axis along with the stem. And what's interesting is this is where the water will collect within Jewelweed. So if you are suffering from any ailment where you want to use Jewelweed topically, this is some of the best section to use, especially right off the plant fresh. So let's test this out a little bit. Let's pluck this off. And then you guys can see all of this juice. Look at all of this juice that I'm able to squeeze out of here just at the small little section. And this is exactly what you want to use on your skin whenever you have a sunburn or poison ivy rash or a bug bite. You can use this along with plantain, and these juices are really, really good for the skin for helping to relieve those ailments. And you can see just how juicy this plant actually can be. And this is the very top node. However, if we simply just go down the plant, you can see what I picked off here, and we follow the plant down, we're going to notice these nodes and these bumps getting larger and larger as we go down the plant. And these are the juiciest parts of the stem of Jewelweed, and this is why the stem, along with the crushed leaves of Jewelweed, is extremely useful. Whenever we follow the stem down to a leaf axil, like we're at right here, we're going to see a very large stem and a very small stem with one leaf. And the reason this is while Jewelweed is actually growing, what it will do is it will send out these small little one-section leaves, just like this here, so that way the plant can gain through photosynthesis and it can shoot out these larger leaves, which will then terminate in these axils, just like you can see on this one here. And then if we go up, we're going to find another large axil. And each one of these axils can produce flowers and seed pods. And this is part of the plant's reproductive and survival strategy, so that way it can continue to reproduce and it can continue to live. Whenever you guys find a whole lot of jewelweed plants, it's also really helpful to look on the ground for some of the younger plants like we can see right here. This plant is growing about 12 inches tall right now, whereas the rest of the jewelweed is approximately 3.5 feet tall. So anywhere you find jewelweed, you're going to find it spreading out, and you're going to be finding these very small, lush, and very dense plants with all this dense foliage. And we can notice how it still has these very lance and oval-shaped leaves with these dull teeth running along the margins. Its leafing pattern happens in an alternate shape or an alternate form, so these leaves will alternate all the way up and down the stem. We can see this one very large leaf axil with all these leaves, and we can also see these very young small ones. So this lets us know that it is jewelweed. And if we look closer at the stem, we're going to notice that it has this translucent sort of appearance to it, and it's very juicy whenever we go to break into it. Now you guys might be wondering what kind of environment jewelweed can grow in and how tall this plant can actually grow. I have seen jewelweed growing as tall as 5.5 to 6 feet tall. I'm sure it can probably grow even taller than that. Right here, these plants in front of me, the angle's a little bit deceiving. However, these plants in front of me are about 4.5 feet tall. However, if we look back over here, we can actually see these plants are a little bit taller. These plants are about 5 to 5.5 feet tall right now. They're about equal to my shoulders or to my neck level. So this plant can grow really tall. So what kind of environments does jewelweed generally like to grow in? I will usually find my jewelweed growing on the edges of woods where it's really moist, where there's a lot of drainage or there's a lot of runoff of water whenever it rains excessively. This plant really loves shaded and moist environments. The area that all of this jewelweed is growing, and you can see all this jewelweed right here in front of us, all this jewelweed is growing in a shaded environment. It's constantly shaded here, and it's constantly wet. The soil is very, very moist. So let's go over here a little bit further. And we can also see some more jewelweed growing here with these very distinct orange flowers. We can even see the silhouette, this triangular sort of silhouette that the flowers will have of jewelweed. We can see all these flowers at the lower nodes of the stem, and we can even see that very enlarged node there on this stem right here from all the water that jewelweed has sucked up. So that's how you guys can identify jewelweed or spotted touch-me-not. I've covered this plant in a couple of other videos, and I'll put those in the description below if you guys are interested. And today I want to bring you an identification video on the wild plantain. Now within the United States, there are two different types of plantain that you're probably going to be running across more often than not. Now the plant that we're looking at here is broadleaf plantain, or Plantago major. Now each plantain is very easy to identify, and there aren't any lookalikes to my knowledge within the United States. This is called broadleaf plantain because, as you can see, it has these very broad oval or egg-shaped leaves. You can see they're shaped just like an egg, and the veins in these leaves, as you can see, start at one point at the petiole of the leaf stem, and then they rise outward. They radiate a little bit outward, and then they all come together towards the tip of the plant. Now the sides or the margins of the leaves of plantain are going to be smooth. You're not going to see any teeth or serrations along the edges or the margins of these leaves. However, you may notice, like you can see here in this one, the sides or margins of the leaves can be a little wavy in look or appearance. Now earlier in the year, this plant has a flower spike, a very distinct flower spike that's coming up out of the center of the rosette. However, it doesn't have its flower spike now, but I will put a picture down below in the right-hand corner so you guys can see what that looks like. Now the broadleaf plantain usually grows in a basal rosette pattern. As you can see here, these leaves are growing in a circle around the main taproot of the plant, and that's what makes this a basal rosette. One of the good things about plantain, as you can see here, is it's constantly spitting up new, tender young leaves, just like you can see this little bitty guy here. And the good thing about that is this plant is not only edible, but it's also medicinal. And the edible parts of the plant are these young, tender leaves before they get too stringy. Whereas here on this big leaf, you can see these huge veins that run through this leaf, and these veins are responsible for the strings, which you can see those strings on the back side of the plant here. Now, broadleaf plantain and narrowleaf plantain are both in the exact same family that commercial psyllium is gathered from, and here you can see the seed spike that's left from Plantago major. And these seeds can be undoubtedly used the same way as psyllium husks or psyllium fiber. And that's one of the many uses of this plant for food, besides using the young tender leaves for a salad, is that you can use these seeds as a psyllium substitute. And now when it comes to medicine, this plant is very well known within the herbal community because of how effective it is, as well as how mild and gentle and safe this plant is whenever you use it for medicine. This plant can be used for medicine internally and externally. So that's a really, really good thing about this plant. As far as using it, it's useful for an astringent. It's very, very good for drawing out infections or boils or zits. You can use this to make a rheumatism wash or a poultice. This will help to cool the pain of rheumatism. This will help to relieve inflammation of burns, insect stings, and things of that sort because it is very cooling. It's astringent in nature, which means that it contracts the skin or it has contracting agents within it. So if you need to check diarrhea, this plant can help do that. Also, its leaves and root is very high in mucilage, so this plant is also very soothing to inflame mucous membranes of the mouth and throat. And that's another thing this plant can be used for, is for colds and flus to help you ease the discomfort or hoarseness of your sore throat. And when it comes to using the plant for medicine, the entire plant can be used. You can use the leaves, you can use the stem, you can use the flowers, you can use the seeds, you can use the root, you can use all of this plant for medicine. However, my favorite thing to do is just pluck off any good-looking leaves like you can see here, because this plant will continue to put out new leaves all throughout the entire growing season. So the good thing about that is if you just keep plucking the leaves, you're going to have a constant supply of plantain growing in your yard. Whereas if you take the root, you are going to kill that plant. Not to worry though, because this is a noxious weed, and as a matter of fact, the natives of North America called this plant white man's foot, because it went everywhere we went. So this plant is extremely noxious, and you're not going to kill it in any way. And now the second major type of plantain that you're going to be running across is called longleaf or narrowleaf plantain, or Plantago lanceolata. Now as you can see here, it looks somewhat similar to the broadleaf plantain or Plantago major in the fact that it does grow in a basal rosette around the taproot of the plant. The veins of the leaf, which are responsible for strings, all start at the petiole and run somewhat parallel to each other all the way to the very tip of the leaf. Longleaf plantain has very long, linear-shaped leaves, as you can see here, and the sides, or the margin of the leaf, is going to be smooth. You're not going to notice any teeth or serrations on these leaves either. However, as you may notice here, you may see on the surface of the leaves all of these little bitty hairs or little fuzz. And you may notice how the underside of the leaves on narrowleaf plantain are smooth. They don't have any of those hairs. However, those discerning ribs or veins are still there, and these are responsible for the strings in this plant as well. Just like its larger-leaved brother, this plant will spit up new leaves all throughout the growing season, so that makes it a really, really good plant to use for medicine. You can use all of this plant, including the root. However, I like to harvest it the same way. I like to just use the very tips of these young leaves and any good-looking leaves like you can see here. The reason I like to do that is because, again, this plant will continue to spit up leaves all throughout the growing season, so I have a continuing supply of these plants. Another unique feature about plantain is on the petiole towards the base of the root, you're going to notice usually a red tinge or a purple tinge like you can see here. And it's going to fade as it goes up and turns into the leaf itself. On some leaves, this tinge may be very dark, like you can see here, or it may be very light, like you can see here. On some leaves, it can be absent altogether, like you see in this one here. Now, this plant shares a lot of similar uses with its larger leaf brother. However, a lot of people end up using this plant more often than broadleaf plantain, and some field guides and some sources will say this plant is just a little bit more effective. In my experience, though, I don't notice much of a difference in the effectiveness between narrowleaf plantain and broadleaf plantain. So that's something you may want to keep in mind and something you may want to experiment with. Usually I use both of these plants together anytime I'm using Plantain. I'm sitting outside in a huge field, and I thought I'd bring you guys an identification video on Boneset. What you're looking at right now is called Boneset. This is a very medicinal plant. This plant is extremely good for colds and flus. It's also good for bone bumps, like if you get a bruise or on your bone, or maybe you've got like arthritis or something. This plant is really good for that. There are a couple different ways you can identify Boneset. The easiest, obviously, is these white flowers. You can see there is a lot of flowers here on this one plant, and this is all one plant. But if you look closely at these flowers, you'll notice all these little stamens, all these little spikes. The stem of Boneset is extremely hairy. I'm sure you can notice that here, all those little bitty hairs. The leaves of Boneset go around the stem. The stem perforates the leaves. Here you can see a fold in the leaf on both sides, right where the stem meets. And here is an underside view of the leaf and stem section of Boneset. Here's a different angle of the stem perforating the leaves. Whenever you feel these leaves, you'll notice that they feel kind of leathery. They feel almost kind of like buckskin, in my opinion, on the top. The underside feels kind of fuzzy. And here you'll notice the fuzz, or the little hairs, on the underside of the leaves of Boneset. You'll see the main vein is very prominent on the backside of the leaf, whereas on the top, it's just a crease. The leaves are very long, they are lance-shaped, and they are toothed. Now the area I'm in, it stays really moist, so you're going to find Boneset in clearings that are moist. You're not going to find it in dry, high fields where you're going to find like echinacea or things like that. It's a really easy plant to identify. You can find it pretty much anywhere. The places it really likes to grow, though, these are the kind of areas where Boneset likes to grow. This is just a huge clearing in between two tree lines. The parts that you want to use on Boneset are the flowers and the leaves. Those are the most medicinal parts, and you want to use those dried. So there's 5 medicinal plants that are really easy to identify, how to identify them, and how to use them. I thank all of you guys for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. If you want to learn more about wild edibles or medicinal plants, please make sure to subscribe. And if you want to support the channel even further, make sure to check out my Patreon page where I share some extra perks with you guys as well.